All right, there you have it, folks. Brett Kavanaugh chosen to succeed Justice Anthony Kennedy, vowing to keep an open mind. We have our correspondent John Brain in Washington, as well as Anisha Singh with the Center for American Progress. John, I want to cross over to you first. Tell us a little bit more about Kavanaugh.
Well, I think one of the more noticeable things to say is that this is a judge who's gone on record as saying that serving presidents should not be liable to criminal prosecution, bearing in mind that Donald Trump has been facing that sort of possibility from day one in his office. That could be quite a significant development if he is nominated. It's likely he'll be fiercely contested by the Democratic Party. They'll be worried about his stance on abortion and that he'd generally be too conservative for American society. But Donald Trump had made no bones of this, that he was going to choose someone who was conservative leaning. And this pick will undoubtedly shift the Supreme Court to a more conservative bent, both socially and politically, because Justice Kennedy, although he'd been appointed by Ronald Reagan on social matters, he, in the event, was actually fairly liberal. He certainly maintained the Roe Wade abortion laws. That may not be the case under Kavanaugh, but of course we'll have to wait and see if any test cases do reach the court now that he's in position. The other thing to say is that although these justices are appointed because of their views, often they don't necessarily follow that once they've been in position for some time. They are completely independent. They cannot be removed by any president, including the ones who've appointed them.
And John, talk to me a little bit more about, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell had said earlier he accused Democrats of basically using scare tactics against these potential nominees. Where do you think his confirmation hearing will go, and what type of roadblocks do you think Democrats will throw up in his case?
Well, I'm sure the Democrats will oppose it, and bear in mind the Republicans have got a wafer-thin majority in the Senate. They've got a majority of just 2, and one of their senators, John McCain, is currently away from the Senate because he's ill. So it'll only take one Republican senator to turn against this appointment to stop it in its tracks, and there are 2 female Republican senators who are both concerned about any possibility of abortion law being weakened. So this could be a very interesting confirmation process, and it won't automatically result in Brett Kavanaugh being the new Supreme Court Justice. So, of course, the wind is in his sails. He's been nominated by the president, and presumably the majority of the Republican Party, at least, will rally behind him.
All right, John, stick with us for a second. I want to cross over to Anisha Singh with the Center for American Progress. Anisha, thanks for being with us, and thanks for your patience. What's your reaction?
Thank you. I mean, we expected this. We knew Kavanaugh was one of Trump's picks from the 25 nominees that the Heritage Foundation Judicial Crisis Network were giving him. What's really interesting about Kavanaugh, though, is that he has come out and said that the president has absolute discretion on whether or not to hire or fire a special counsel. He has said that a president should not be criminally indicted, and that's very interesting given all of the investigation questions and whether or not President Trump can pardon himself that might come to question in the Supreme Court in the near future. And also we know that this nominee, as has been stated, is not pro-women's choice and autonomy. We know that this nominee is not going to care about the ACA and would not vote to uphold Obamacare and health care for all.
Anisha, we can hear those demonstrations happening behind you, demonstrators on both sides of this issue. What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
It is pro-choicers and anti-choicers behind me going back and forth, because we know that Roe is going to be a big issue here. Whether or not Roe will be overturned is crucial here. We know we've seen so many cases come before the court before challenging a woman's right to contraception by her employer, challenging whether or not a woman has autonomy over her body. So we are seeing that there are going to be test cases coming out of Texas and other states that will end up in the Supreme Court. And this court will shift more right, and it will end up affecting generations to come for 40+ years.
And Anisha, this was even a concern actually among conservatives, the Kavanaugh pick, because he wrote a 2011 opinion on Obamacare. He's written 300 opinions for the D.C. Circuit. He vowed tonight to keep an open mind, but do you think that that's possible?
That is absolutely what every single nominee would be saying in this position. That is what they have to say. He talked a lot about his family, about being called Coach K. He's trying to humanize himself and make people ignore his precedent and his viewpoints and his ideology. But we all need to be paying attention to that, because ultimately that's what we will see. We saw this with Gorsuch as well. He said the same thing: I will just follow precedent. But this term, his first full term, we saw Gorsuch go ahead and give 5-4, be the 5-4 deciding factor for so many cases, including the Muslim ban, including women's choice on what they learn from centers, unions. And so we're seeing that Gorsuch himself has turned against what he has said, and we know that this nominee will do the same exact thing.
Anisha, thank you for bringing us your perspective. I want to cross back over to our correspondent, John Brain, who's also following this outside the White House. John, what happens next?
Well, the next thing is the tricky bit for Donald Trump and the Republicans. They have to get this over the line. They have to get Brett Kavanaugh actually in place as a Supreme Court justice, and that means him being accepted by the Senate. As I mentioned earlier, the Republicans have a tiny majority on the Senate, so even if all Republicans support the nomination, it'll only just squeak through. If any Republicans oppose Brett Kavanaugh, then he will not become the Supreme Court justice, unless, surprisingly, some Democrats throw their weight behind him. That's unlikely. And we're being told there are 2 female senators who are very concerned that Kavanaugh may water down abortion rights for women. So that could be a very big test for him. As we're already seeing, there are already demonstrations happening here in Washington against the nomination. It's likely to be a bitter fight up and down the country before he takes his seat on the Supreme Court.
John, less than a minute till we need to wrap. I just want to compare to the other nominees that Trump had been considering. How contentious is Kavanaugh in comparison to the other people who the president was considering?
Well, he's certainly not the most contentious. There was a woman called Amy Coney Barrett who was evangelical about stopping abortion. So that would have, her nomination, quite frankly, would have never got through. But he could have chosen more. His shortlist certainly had more moderate figures on there who might have been acceptable to the Democrats. In fact, they'd intimated that they would push through the nominations of certain people. Brett Kavanaugh is a divisive figure, though, certainly for the Democrats, and it will be, as I say, quite a bitter fight before he is nominated, before he's confirmed.
Absolutely. John Brain there in Washington following this. Brett Kavanaugh nominated actually to succeed Justice Anthony Kennedy. All right, we'll leave it there.